Chapter 1. The question that wouldn't sit still. The movie had been playing for nearly an hour before Katy Reynolds realized she couldn't recount a single plot point. It wasn't that she wasn't trying. She'd followed the first few scenes, even laughed in the right places. But somewhere between the third dramatic monologue and the hero's inexplicably perfect hair, her attention had drifted. Not to anything urgent, not to anything new, just to the quiet, persistent question that had been growing in her chest for weeks, maybe months. She shifted slightly against the couch cushion, stealing a glance at Daryl. He looked comfortable, one arm thrown lazily across the back of the sofa, his gaze locked on the screen. His expression was relaxed, open, completely at ease, the same way he always looked when he was home with her. That should have made her feel settled. Instead, it made the silence louder. Katy tucked her legs beneath her and tried to push the thought away again. They were good. More than good. 3 years together, no major fights, shared routines, shared weekends, shared grocery lists that somehow always ended in too many snacks and not enough vegetables. She loved him. She knew he loved her. There had never been any doubt about that. But there had been conversations once. About the future. About what came next. And lately, there hadn't been. She picked at a loose thread on her sleeve, her thumb worrying it into something worse. She wasn't panicking, she told herself. She wasn't spiraling into some dramatic assumption. This wasn't insecurity. This was maintenance. Communication. Healthy, normal, adult communication. Still, her heart picked up as if she were about to leap off something tall. "Hey," she said quietly. Daryl didn't look away from the television right away. He answered. Katy swallowed. "No big deal. Just say it." "Do you?" She paused, huffed a small breath and started again. "Are you still thinking about building a life with me?" That did it. He turned immediately, eyebrows pulling together in confusion, then softening almost at once. "Of course," he said without hesitation. Relief washed through her like warm water, quick and immediate. Her shoulders loosened, and she nodded, a small smile forming. "Okay," she said, but the relief didn't settle. It lingered, hovering just above something unfinished. She waited a beat, then two. Daryl turned back to the movie. Katy stared at him. "But," she prompted. He blinked, then glanced back at her, slower this time. "But, you said of course," she said, tilting her head slightly. "And then nothing else. There's a but. I can hear it just sitting there." Daryl's mouth curved faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. He let out a quiet exhale, shifting in his seat as if looking for a more comfortable position that didn't exist. "I love you completely," he said. Katy's smile widened automatically. "I know." His gaze held hers for a moment longer than necessary. "I really do," he added. There was something in his tone, earnest, almost careful, that made her sit up a little straighter. "Okay," she said gently. "So what's the issue?" He let out a short breath, running a hand over the back of his neck. "Please don't take this the wrong way," he began. Katy gave a small, reassuring smile. "You know that's not a great start." "I know," he admitted, a flicker of humor appearing before fading again. I'm not sure how to explain it without making myself sound crazy." She leaned slightly toward him now, her voice softer. "Just tell me. We can work through it." Daryl studied her for a second, as though weighing something. Then his shoulders dropped just a fraction, his posture easing in reluctant surrender. "Okay," he said, "but you're not allowed to get angry if you don't like what I say." Katy raised an eyebrow. "That feels like a trap." He huffed faintly. "It's not. I need you to hear me out." She considered him, then nodded. "Fine. I'll try." He took a deeper breath this time, steadying himself. "I've been thinking about the future," he said slowly. "Like, really thinking about it. Not just the vague version, you know? The actual details." Katy smiled softly. "Okay. And I keep thinking about when I have kids someday," he continued. "What that's going to look like." "That's normal," she said. "People think about that." "I know," he said quickly. "It's just, I start wondering if they'll love me, or respect me." Katy let out a small laugh of disbelief. "Of course they will." He didn't smile back. "I'm not so sure," he said. That made her pause. "What do you mean?" she asked, her tone sharpening with curiosity. Daryl hesitated again, eyes flicking briefly away before returning to hers. "Remember," he said almost cautiously. "You said you wouldn't get angry." "I remember," she replied, though her curiosity was now firmly mixed with concern. "Just tell me." He nodded once, as if bracing himself. "I've been with you for 3 years," he said. "And I love you completely." Katy softened again despite herself. "I know. And I love the life we've been building," he added. "I can see a future with you that doesn't scare me." That pulled a small, genuine smile from her. "That's a very romantic way to say it." He didn't react to the joke. "We see your mom a lot," he continued instead. "At least once a month, usually more." Katy nodded easily. "She likes you." "I like her too," he said. "She's great." "Okay?" Katy prompted. "And in all the time we've been together, Daryl went on, his voice tightening just slightly. I've seen your dad twice. The smile on her face faltered. The last time was over a year ago, he added. Katy opened her mouth, then closed it again. You've never mentioned a fight, he continued, or anything being wrong. There isn't anything wrong, she said, a little too quickly. I'm not saying there is, he replied. That's kind of the point. She stared at him now, fully alert. So I've been trying to understand it, he said, his words gaining momentum as if he couldn't stop them now. And the only conclusion I keep coming back to is, maybe you see your dad as optional. The word landed heavier than anything else he'd said. Katy felt it in her chest. That's not, she started. But Daryl pressed on, the last of his hesitation giving way. And I keep thinking, he said, what if that's what my future looks like? Raising kids who grow up and just stop showing up, stop calling, stop caring. Because somewhere along the way, I became expendable. The room felt suddenly too quiet. The television flickered on in the background, completely ignored now. Katy stared at him, her mind scrambling to react, to defend, to argue, to correct, but nothing came out, because he wasn't wrong. Not exactly. Her thoughts stumbled over memories she hadn't examined in years. Her dad sitting in the stands at soccer games, fixing things around the house without being asked. Quiet, steady presence. Always there. Always available. Always assumed. She hadn't seen him in months, and she hadn't thought it mattered. She started again, but the words felt thin. Daryl's expression softened immediately, regret creeping into his features. Hey, I'm not accusing you of anything. This is where my brain goes. I overthink things. You know that. She nodded faintly, but her focus had shifted entirely inward, because for once she couldn't argue. For once, there wasn't a misunderstanding to clear up or a miscommunication to fix. There was just something she had never noticed, until someone else pointed straight at it. And now she couldn't unsee it. Chapter 2. A door that should have been there. Katy didn't sleep well. Not in the dramatic, tossing and turning kind of way. It was quieter than that, more persistent. Every time she drifted off, her mind circled back to the same thought, the same image. Her dad standing somewhere just out of reach, steady and patient, exactly as he had always been. Waiting. When her alarm went off the next morning, she stared at the ceiling for a long moment, her chest already tight with a decision she'd apparently made sometime between 3 and 5 a.m. She was going to see him. Not text, not call, not pencil it in for sometime this weekend, like she had so many times before. She was going to go, knock on his door, and fix the thing she'd never realized she'd been breaking. It felt oddly urgent. Not panic, exactly, but a pressing sense that something needed correcting immediately. Daryl stirred beside her as she got out of bed. You're up early, he murmured, voice thick with sleep. Yeah, she said, pulling on a sweater. I'm going to go see my dad. That woke him a little more. He propped himself up on one elbow, studying her face. Today, she nodded. I should have gone a long time ago. There was no accusation in his expression, just a quiet understanding. Do you want me to come with you? Katy hesitated, then shook her head. No, I think this should just be me. Okay, he said gently. Call me if you need anything. She paused by the door, offering him a small smile. I will. The drive across town felt longer than she remembered. It wasn't traffic, that was annoyingly normal, but every stoplight seemed to linger, every mile stretching just a little bit farther than it should have. Katy drummed her fingers against the steering wheel, her thoughts bouncing between anticipation and a growing thread of unease she couldn't quite name. She tried to picture his apartment. Not the vague memory she'd carried for years, but the actual recent version. The color of the building. The plants he kept by the door. Whether he changed the curtains again because he liked fresh sunlight, as he used to say. The details were frustratingly blurry. That's ridiculous, she muttered to herself, gripping the wheel tighter. Hadn't been that long. Had it? She parked in the lot outside his building and sat there for a moment, engine idling. Her heart had picked up somewhere between the last turn and the parking space, a steady knock against her ribs. This wasn't a confrontation. This wasn't even complicated. She was here to say sorry, to hug him, to maybe sit down and have one of those long, meandering conversations they used to have about nothing and everything. It would be fine. She turned off the car. The hallway smelled faintly like cleaning products and something fried, a combination she recognized instantly. That helped, grounded her. Familiar was good. She walked to his door, each step firm, purposeful. Then she stopped. For a split second, her confidence faltered. Not because of anything visible, but because of the simple, unsettling realization that she hadn't done this in a very long time. She knocked anyway. Once, twice, a little louder the third time. Footsteps approached from the other side, light and quick. Katy straightened slightly, her apology forming in her throat, ready to come out the second the door opened. It wasn't her father who answered. A woman stood there instead, mid-30s maybe, holding a toddler on her hip. The child blinked up at Katy with wide, curious eyes, clutching a stuffed animal missing one ear. The woman offered a polite but cautious smile. Hi, can I help you? Katy blinked, her mind scrambling to catch up with what she was seeing. I'm looking for my dad, she said, the words coming out slower than intended. He lives here, or he did. Mark Reynolds. The woman's expression shifted, confusion replacing politeness. I'm sorry. I've lived here for about 9 months. I don't know anyone by that name. The hallway seemed to tilt. 9 months, Katy repeated. Yeah, the woman said gently, adjusting the child on her hip. We moved in last fall. Katy stared past her, as if her father might suddenly appear from around a corner, sheepishly explaining the mix-up. Nothing moved. Oh, she said finally. Okay, thank you. She turned before the woman could say anything else, walking back down the hallway with measured steps that didn't quite match the disorientation buzzing through her. 9 months. That wasn't a small gap. That wasn't something you accidentally missed because life got busy. That was absence. Katy reached her car and slid into the driver's seat, closing the door a little harder than necessary. She sat there, hands resting on the wheel, staring straight ahead. Okay, she whispered to herself. Okay, that's fine. People moved. Apartments changed. There were perfectly normal explanations. He could have texted. She reached for her phone. Her messages with her dad sat near the bottom of the list, not because she didn't care, but because there wasn't much to push the thread back to the top. She opened it. The most recent message was from him. Not new, but recent enough to feel current. At least it had felt that way yesterday. Hey kiddo, hope your week's going well. A brief warmth flickered at the nickname. Her response sat below it. It is. Busy but good. I'll call you soon, promise. No call had followed. She scrolled up. The pattern emerged quickly. His messages, longer once full of questions, had gradually shortened. Her replies had followed suit, trimming down to quick acknowledgments, occasional emojis, the conversational equivalent of a passing wave. The gaps between them stretched wider the further back she went. Her stomach dropped. Why didn't you say anything? She murmured under her breath. She tapped his contact and hit call. The ringing didn't even start. The automated voice came immediately, flat and impersonal. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. Katy pulled the phone away, staring at it like it had personally betrayed her. No, she said quietly, shaking her head. No. She tried again. Same message. Her mind raced now, moving faster than she could keep up. Maybe he changed numbers. Maybe he forgot to update her. Maybe you didn't give him a reason to think you needed it. The thought hit harder than anything else. She sat there for a long moment, the car silent around her. This wasn't just distance anymore. This was something else, something she didn't understand. And the worst part, the part that curled uncomfortably in her chest, was the realization that she didn't even know where to start fixing it. Katy exhaled slowly, forcing herself to move. There was only one place that still felt certain. Daryl. The drive back felt even longer, her thoughts louder now, pressing in from all sides. By the time she reached the apartment, her earlier resolve had shifted into something sharper, edged with confusion and a creeping sense of guilt she couldn't shake. Daryl was sitting at the kitchen counter when she walked in, a mug of coffee in front of him. He looked up immediately. That was fast, he said. How'd? He stopped when he saw her face. What happened? Katy closed the door behind her and leaned against it for a second, grounding herself before speaking. He's not there, she said. Daryl stood slowly. What do you mean, not there? There's a woman living in his apartment, Katy continued, her voice steadier than she felt. She said they've been there for 9 months. 9, Daryl frowned. Did your dad mention moving? Katy shook her head. No. And his phone? It's disconnected. Silence filled the space between them, heavier now. Daryl stepped closer. Okay, he said carefully. We can figure this out. Katy let out a small, humorless laugh. I don't even know where to begin. He reached for her hands, warm and steady. Then we start with what you do know. She looked at him, her thoughts spinning. For the first time since the night before, his fear, his quiet, honest worry about being forgotten, didn't feel abstract, felt real, and suddenly terrifyingly close. I think, Katy said slowly, her voice tightening as the realization settled in. I may not know my dad as well as I thought I did. Chapter 3. The gaps between the messages. Katy didn't expect it to feel this complicated. Logically, she knew what step came next. You didn't find someone by sitting on your couch replaying old text messages and quietly unraveling. You retraced their steps. You went to the places they'd been. You talked to people who might know something. Simple. Except nothing about this felt simple. Start with his job, Daryl suggested, leaning against the kitchen counter, while Katy paced the length of the living room for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. She stopped mid-stride. His job? Yeah, he said. He worked at the same company forever, right? Over 25 years, she said automatically. Then someone there has to know something. Even if he left, people talk. Katy considered that, her fingers curling slightly against her palms. I don't even know who he worked with. Daryl gave her a small, encouraging smile. You don't have to. You just need a starting point. She exhaled slowly, nodding. Okay. His office. Good, Daryl said. That's something. She grabbed her bag and her keys again, the motion sharper this time, purposeful. Do you want me to come with you? He asked. Katy hesitated again, the same instinct flickering as before. This felt personal. Not in a don't involve him way, but in the sense that she needed to face it herself, at least for now. No, she said softly. I've got it. He nodded, stepping forward to press a quick kiss to her forehead. Text me if anything changes. I will. The office building sat tucked between two newer developments, older than everything around it but still standing stubbornly in place. Katy recognized it immediately. She'd been there once, years ago, for some holiday event her dad had insisted she attend. She remembered laughing, the smell of catered food, the way he'd introduced her to people like she was something important. The memory felt distant now. Inside, the lobby was quiet, polished to a muted shine. A receptionist sat behind the front desk, typing steadily, pausing only when Katy approached. Hi, Katy said, forcing a polite smile. I'm looking for some information. My dad worked here, Mark Reynolds. The receptionist's expression shifted slightly, recognition flickering. Not the warm kind, but something closer to cautious. I'm sorry, she said, folding her hands neatly on the desk. Who did you say? Mark Reynolds, Katy repeated. He worked here for years. I think in finance? Maybe operations. The woman hesitated, then reached for her mouse. Let me check something. Katy stood there, heart beating a little faster, watching as the woman clicked through something on her screen. Seconds stretched. Finally, the receptionist looked up again, her tone carefully neutral. Mark Reynolds doesn't work here anymore. Katy nodded quickly. Right, I figured he might have left. I was just hoping you could tell me where he went. I haven't been able to reach him. The woman's expression softened just slightly, though her posture stayed formal. I'm afraid I don't have information on former employees' current locations, she said. Katy blinked. Oh, okay. Do you know when he left? Another pause. Then, quietly, it's been over a year. Something in Katy's chest tightened. Over a year? She repeated. Yes, the receptionist said. Katy swallowed. Did he leave on his own? The woman hesitated again, clearly weighing what she could and couldn't say. Then she leaned forward just slightly, lowering her voice in a subtle shift of tone. Off the record, she said carefully. There were layoffs, quite a few. He was part of that. Katy stared at her. Layoffs? She said faintly. The woman gave a small nod. It was difficult. A lot of long-term employees were affected. How long ago? Katy asked, her voice tightening. 14 months, I believe. 14 months. Katy's mind tried to process that number, to align it with her own timeline. 14 months ago, she'd been busy with work deadlines, planning a weekend trip with Daryl, juggling a dozen small, unimportant things that had felt urgent at the time. 14 months ago, her dad had lost his job. And he didn't. Katy stopped because the rest of that sentence didn't make sense. Didn't finish itself. Tell you. The receptionist's expression softened further. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. No, Katy interrupted quickly, shaking her head. It's okay. Thank you. Really. She forced a small smile, then stepped away from the desk, her movements slower now. Outside, the air felt heavier, or maybe that was just her. 14 months. That wasn't just a missed conversation. That was an entire life event. Something huge, destabilizing, the kind of thing that changed everything. And she hadn't known. Hadn't even suspected. Katy leaned against her car, her breath coming out in a shaky exhale as she stared down at her phone again. Her message thread with her dad suddenly looked different. The shorter replies, the growing space between conversations, the way his messages had shifted from asking about her life to simply wishing her well. She hadn't noticed, or worse, she had, and she hadn't looked closely enough to see what it meant. How did I miss this? She whispered. The question didn't have an answer, because the truth was sitting right there, clear and uncomfortable. She hadn't been looking. Her hands trembled slightly as she scrolled through her contacts again, stopping on a number she rarely used. Her grandmother. Katy hesitated, thumb hovering over the call button. This would make it real in a different way. Expand it beyond just her. Beyond just this quiet, growing realization. But she couldn't keep pretending this was something minor. Something contained. She pressed call. It rang longer than she expected. Finally, a familiar voice answered, warm but edged with concern. Hello. Hi, Grandma, Katy said, her voice soft. It's me. Katy? Oh, sweetheart, it's good to hear from you, her grandmother replied. Is everything all right? Katy closed her eyes briefly, bracing herself. I was actually calling about Dad. There was a pause. Not long, but noticeable. What about him? Her grandmother asked, her tone carefully neutral now. Katy's chest tightened. I went to his apartment today, she said. He's not there, and his phone's disconnected. Do you know where he is? Silence stretched across the line. Longer this time. Katy, her grandmother began slowly. We were hoping you might know. The words hit like a drop in her stomach. Know what? Katy asked, her voice barely steady. We haven't heard from him in months, her grandmother said. 6? 7, maybe? Katy pressed her free hand against her forehead, her grip tightening on the phone. Months? She echoed. Yes, came the quiet reply. We've all been worried. Your grandfather tried calling. Writing? Nothing. Katy's breath caught. I just found out he lost his job, she said, the words tumbling out now. Over a year ago. Another silence, this one heavier. He didn't tell us that, her grandmother said. Something inside Katy shifted then, the weight of it all settling into something clearer. This wasn't just distance. This wasn't just missed calls or busy schedules. This was a man who had quietly unraveled his life piece by piece. And no one, not his parents, not his daughter, had been there to see it happening. Okay, Katy said, her voice steadier now, even as her chest ached. Then we find him. Her grandmother let out a long breath. Yes, we do. Katy straightened, pulling herself away from the car as purpose replaced the paralysis. For the first time since yesterday, the confusion had direction. Not easy, not comforting, but clear. And as she hung up the phone, one thought settled firmly in her mind, sharper than anything else. She wasn't going to let her father disappear again. Chapter 4. The weight of what wasn't said. By the time Katy got back to the apartment, the problem had grown larger than her. It wasn't just her and her father anymore, or even the quiet ache of realizing she'd missed something important. Now there were missing months, unanswered calls, concerned grandparents, and a man who had somehow slipped out of everyone's reach without anyone stopping him. Daryl was still in the kitchen when she walked in, though his coffee had long since gone cold. He looked up immediately, searching her face for answers she wasn't sure she had. Well? He asked gently. Katy set her bag down slowly, as if careful movements might make the words easier to say. He lost his job, she said. 14 months ago. Daryl frowned. What? There were layoffs, she continued. His company let go a bunch of people. He was one of them. Daryl straightened, the casual calm he'd been holding on to slipping just a little. Did he tell you that? Katy shook her head. Or his parents? Another shake. Daryl let out a slow breath. Okay, that's not great. No, Katy said faintly. It's not. She moved to the counter, resting her hands against the cool surface, grounding herself in something solid. I called my grandma. Daryl waited, already bracing. They haven't seen him in 7 months, she said. Maybe more. The silence that followed felt heavier than any reaction. They thought I knew where he was, she added quietly. Daryl closed his eyes for a second, then opened them again. Sharper now. Okay, so nobody's heard from him in months. He lost his job over a year ago, and his phone's disconnected. Katy nodded. That's not just someone moving apartments, he said carefully. No, she agreed. It's not. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of it settled between them, filling the room with something tight and undeniable. Then Daryl pushed away from the counter. All right, he said, practical now. Then we treat it like a search. Katy blinked at him. A search? Yeah, he said. We build a timeline. Last confirmed contact. Last known address. Work. Friends. Anywhere he might have gone. We talk to anyone who might have seen him. Katy stared at him for a second, something unexpected flickering through her chest. You're very calm about this, she said. I'm not calm, he replied. I'm focused. There's a difference. That almost made her smile. Almost. Okay, she said after a moment. Timeline. Daryl grabbed a pen and a stray notepad from the counter, sliding it toward her. Start writing. Katy hesitated, then picked up the pen. Last time I saw him, she murmured, thinking aloud. That was over a year ago, I think, around the holidays. Daryl nodded. Okay, last time you talked to him? She frowned at the page. Texted? Probably a couple months ago, but it wasn't real conversation. Just, she gestured vaguely. Small stuff. Okay, Daryl said. And his parents said they haven't heard from him in 7 months? Yeah. Which means, Daryl continued, tapping the counter lightly, something changed around that time. Katy nodded slowly, her thoughts catching up to his. He stopped reaching out, she said. Or stopped being able to, Daryl added. That sent a fresh wave of unease through her. Katy pressed the pen harder against the paper than necessary. I don't understand why he wouldn't tell me about the job. Daryl didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was quieter. Maybe he didn't want you to worry. Katy's head snapped up. That's ridiculous. Of course I would worry. He's my dad. Daryl held her gaze steadily. Would you have noticed if he didn't tell you? The question landed softly, too softly to argue against. Katy looked down again, the pen going still in her hand. No, she admitted. The word felt heavier than anything else she'd said all day. Daryl's expression softened immediately. Hey, this isn't about blaming yourself. It kind of is, she said quietly. It's not, he said firmly. It's about figuring out where he is now. Katy nodded, though the guilt didn't loosen its grip. Who else can we contact? Daryl asked. She thought for a moment. He didn't have a lot of close friends. Or, if he did, I don't know them. Co-workers, Daryl suggested. He worked there forever, but I don't remember any names, she said. Maybe HR would have something, but I doubt they'd tell me anything. Probably not, Daryl agreed. Katy tapped the pen against the page, her mind searching for anything she'd overlooked. His parents, she said suddenly. They'll know more people. Extended family. Maybe someone's heard from him and didn't think to say anything. Daryl nodded. That's good. Call them back. Katy hesitated. No, she said after a moment. I should go there. To their house, Daryl asked. Yeah. She looked up at him. This isn't something I should handle over the phone. He considered that, then nodded. All right. She stood there for a moment, the reality of what she was about to do settling in. This wasn't a quick visit anymore. This wasn't just an apology and a hug and a promise to do better. This was something bigger. Something messy and uncertain. I'll go this afternoon, she said. I'll come with you, Daryl replied immediately. Katy paused. This time she didn't say no. Okay, she said. Yeah, I'd like that. The drive to her grandparents' house felt different from the one that morning. Not heavier exactly, more defined. There was a direction now, even if it was unclear where it would lead. Daryl drove, one hand steady on the wheel, the other resting near the gearshift. Katy watched the road ahead, her fingers laced tightly together in her lap. Can I ask you something? She said after a while. He glanced at her briefly. Always. Katy hesitated, then pushed forward. When you said what you said last night, about being forgotten, Daryl's grip on the wheel tightened just slightly. Yeah. She looked down at her hands. Did you really think I would do that? To you? The question hung in the car, quiet but sharp. Daryl didn't answer right away. I didn't think you would do it on purpose, he said finally. But I did think. Maybe it could happen without you realizing it. Katy swallowed. That doesn't make it better, she said. I know, he replied. She turned her head, looking out the window. It's just, I never thought of it like that. My dad's always been there. He just exists in my life. I didn't think he needed anything from me. Daryl glanced at her again, his expression softening. People don't stop needing things just because they're good at not asking. That sentence lodged itself firmly in her chest. Katy let out a long breath, her thoughts swirling. I'm going to find him, she said quietly. And I'm going to fix this. Daryl didn't argue. But after a moment he said gently, you can't fix everything by yourself. Katy gave a small, humorless smile. Watch me try. He huffed a quiet laugh at that, though it didn't quite hide the concern in his eyes. As they pulled onto her grandparents' street, Katy felt her chest tighten again. Not with uncertainty this time, but with the growing weight of what they might uncover. Because whatever had happened to her father, it hadn't happened overnight. And now, finally, she was going to have to face all the parts of his life she had never thought to look at before. Chapter 5. The people he came from. Katy hadn't been to her grandparents' house in almost a year. The realization settled over her as Daryl pulled into the familiar driveway, the worn edges of memory clashing uncomfortably with the reality in front of her. The house looked the same, white siding, carefully maintained flower beds, the small wind chime by the porch that always sounded slightly off-key in the breeze. Nothing had changed. Except, apparently, everything. You ready? Daryl asked, turning off the engine. Katy stared at the front door for a moment longer. No. He gave a short, sympathetic smile. Yeah, that sounds about right. She exhaled slowly and opened the car door anyway. Let's go. The door opened before Katy had a chance to knock twice. Her grandmother stood there, smaller than Katy remembered and yet somehow exactly the same. Soft eyes, steady posture, and a kind of quiet strength that felt immediately grounding. Katy, she said, her voice both relieved and worried at once. Katy stepped forward without thinking, wrapping her arms around her. Hi, Grandma. The hug lingered just a second longer than usual. Come in, her grandmother said gently, pulling back but keeping a hand on Katy's arm as if unwilling to lose physical contact entirely. Both of you. Daryl offered a polite nod as he followed them inside. It's really nice to see you again. And you, her grandmother said warmly, though her attention kept flicking back to Katy. The living room felt almost untouched by time. Same furniture, same photos lining the shelves. Katy's gaze drifted over them automatically, pausing on one she hadn't really noticed before. Her dad, younger, smiling with an ease she hadn't seen in years. Her chest tightened. Your grandfather will be out in a moment, her grandmother said, guiding them toward the sofa. He's been waiting for some kind of update. Katy nodded, sitting down carefully. I'm sorry I didn't call sooner. Her grandmother shook her head, settling into the chair across from her. You're here now. That's what matters. The words were kind, but they didn't erase the underlying truth. Katy hadn't been here, not for a while. Her grandfather entered a moment later, his presence filling the room in a way that was both familiar and quietly commanding. His expression softened when he saw her, though the concern didn't leave his eyes. "There she is," he said. "Come here." Katy stood and crossed the room, hugging him tightly. "Hi, Grandpa." He held her firmly for a second, then pulled back just enough to look at her. "You look tired." She let out a small, strained laugh. "I feel it." He nodded once, then gestured for everyone to sit. "All right, tell us what you know." Katy sat again, glancing briefly at Daryl before focusing back on her grandparents. "He's not at his apartment anymore," she began. "Someone else has been living there for 9 months. Her grandmother's hand tightened slightly against the arm of her chair. "And his phone's disconnected," Katy continued. "I went to his job today. He was laid off over a year ago." The room went still. "A year?" her grandfather repeated, his voice low. 14 months, Katy said. Her grandmother looked down at her hands. "He didn't say anything." "No," Katy said quietly. "He didn't." Her grandfather leaned back slightly, processing. "That doesn't make any sense. Your father's not the kind of man who just disappears." Katy hesitated. "I think," she said slowly, "he didn't want anyone to know things were going wrong." Daryl shifted beside her but didn't interrupt. Her grandmother looked up, her expression pained. "We would have helped him." "I know," Katy said, her voice tightening. "But that doesn't mean he felt like he could ask." Silence settled over the room again, heavier this time. Her grandfather exhaled slowly. "All right, then we need to figure out where he went after the job." "After the apartment." Katy nodded. "Do you know any of his friends? Anyone he stayed in contact with?" Her grandparents exchanged a glance. "He had colleagues," her grandfather said. "But outside of work," he trailed off, frowning. "He kept to himself more as he got older." That didn't surprise Katy. "He used to have a friend, Tom, I think," her grandmother offered. "They'd meet for coffee sometimes." "Do you have his last name?" Katy asked quickly. Her grandmother shook her head. "No, sweetheart. I haven't seen him in years." Katy pressed her lips together, frustration flickering. "Think," her grandfather said firmly, more to himself than anyone else. "There has to be something we're missing." Katy forced herself to slow down, to think the way Daryl had suggested earlier, methodically, piece by piece. "Did he ever mention money problems?" she asked. Both grandparents shook their heads immediately. "No," her grandmother said. "If anything, he always seemed careful. Responsible." Katy swallowed. "He lost his pension eligibility," she said. "The timing. It was 2 years before he would have qualified." Her grandfather's expression darkened. "That's not a coincidence." "No," Katy said. "It's not." Her grandmother covered her mouth briefly, her eyes glistening. "All those years he worked, and then it's gone," Katy said quietly. The weight of that settled in. A lifetime of planning, stability, routine, gone in a single decision someone else made. "He wouldn't have known what to do," her grandmother said softly. "Not right away." Katy thought about that. Her dad, standing in an office, being told everything he'd worked toward had just ended. No warning she knew of. No safety net he trusted enough to lean on. And then going home, alone. "He started pulling away," Katy said, more to herself now. "That's when it started changing." Her grandfather nodded slowly. "And we didn't see it." The admission hung heavy in the air. Not accusation, just truth. Daryl leaned forward slightly then, speaking for the first time. "We don't have to understand every step yet. We just need the next one." All three turned to him. "We know when things started going wrong," he continued. "So what changed after that? If he lost his job and stayed quiet, then eventually lost his apartment, something else must have happened." Katy's brow furrowed. "Like what?" "Bills," Daryl said. "Rent, utilities. If he wasn't working, those would catch up eventually." Her grandfather nodded. "Which means he might have had to move quickly. Or been forced out," Katy added. Her grandmother's expression tightened. "Oh, Mark." Katy felt her chest ache at the sound of his name. "He wouldn't want anyone to see him struggling," she said. "No," her grandfather agreed. "He wouldn't." Which meant, Katy realized, that he would have gone somewhere no one thought to look. Somewhere invisible. The thought chilled her. Her gaze drifted again to the photo on the shelf, the one of her dad smiling, relaxed, whole. That man felt so far away now. "I should have noticed," she said quietly. "Katy," her grandmother said gently, "this is not all on you." But it didn't feel that way, because out of everyone in his life, she had been the one person he should have been able to turn to without hesitation. And somehow that hadn't happened. Katy straightened slightly, a new resolve settling into place. "Then we stop guessing," she said. "We start looking everywhere." Her grandfather gave a firm nod. "Agreed." Her grandmother reached for Katy's hand, squeezing it tightly. "We'll find him." Katy squeezed back, though a quiet fear lingered beneath her determination. Because with every piece of information they uncovered, the picture of where he might be now was becoming clearer. And it wasn't anywhere she wanted to imagine. Chapter 6. The places people don't look, the first place they didn't think to check was exactly where they should have started. That was what Katy realized 2 days later, standing in the middle of her apartment, staring at a list that had grown longer but no more helpful. They had called relatives, distant cousins who remembered Mark Reynolds as quiet but nice, an aunt who insisted he'd always land on his feet, a former coworker, found through her grandfather, who confirmed the layoffs with sympathetic discomfort and admitted he hadn't spoken to him since. Nothing concrete, nothing recent, just fragments of who her father had been, not where he was. Katy paced slowly, arms crossed, her frustration simmering just beneath the surface. We're missing something obvious. Daryl, sitting at the table with the scattered notes, glanced up. We've covered most of the usual paths. Family, work, friends. He didn't have many of those, Katy interrupted. Okay, Daryl said, nodding. So we think about what happens after everything falls apart. Katy stopped pacing. That's exactly what I've been trying not to think about. Daryl's gaze softened, but he didn't back away from it. I know. Silence stretched for a moment. Uncomfortable. Necessary. What happens when someone loses their job, can't pay rent, and doesn't ask for help? He continued carefully. Katy's stomach tightened. They figure it out, she said weakly. Some do, he replied. And some don't. She closed her eyes briefly, because now there were only a few directions that led. And none of them were good. It was Katy's grandfather who said the word out loud later that afternoon. His voice steady but grim. Shelters, he said. Her grandmother's hand tightened around her teacup. Oh no. Katy felt something in her chest twist sharply. No, she said immediately. That doesn't make sense. He wouldn't ask us for help either, her grandfather said gently. The room fell quiet again. Katy sank back into her chair, her thoughts racing. She tried to picture it, her father navigating something like that. A man who ironed his shirts even on weekends, who kept spare batteries in labeled drawers, who had once driven across town because she'd mentioned liking a specific kind of tea. That man. In a shelter? It didn't fit. And yet, neither did anything else. We don't know for sure, Daryl said, stepping in, his tone measured. But it's a possibility. And if it is, it gives us somewhere to start. Katy looked at him, something fragile flickering in her expression. How do you even do that? Just walk in and start asking? Her grandfather leaned forward slightly. You call first. Some places won't share information. Privacy rules. But they might confirm if someone's staying there. Or point us in the right direction, Daryl added. Katy nodded slowly, trying to steady herself. Okay, then we call. The first few calls went nowhere. Some numbers were outdated. Some organizations politely refused to provide any information, citing confidentiality. Others simply didn't recognize the name. Each no chipped away at Katy's fragile sense of control, her frustration building with each dead end. By the 5th call, she had started bracing herself before every answer. By the 8th, her voice had gone flatter, more mechanical. Try this one, her grandfather said, sliding a piece of paper toward her. It's a shelter in the next town over. It's newer. Katy picked up the phone again, her fingers tightening around it. Okay, she murmured. It rang twice before someone answered. Community Outreach Shelter, this is Angela speaking. How can I help you? Katy swallowed, suddenly aware of how much this mattered. Hi, she began. My name is Katy Reynolds. I'm looking for my father, Mark Reynolds. I know you might not be able to tell me much, but she stopped herself before the words rushed out too quickly. There was a pause on the other end. Can you hold for a moment? The woman asked. Katy's breath caught. Yes, of course. She put the phone on speaker without thinking, placing it on the table as everyone leaned in, the silence in the room tightening like a held breath. The seconds stretched, longer than any of the previous calls. Katy stared at the phone, her pulse loud in her ears. Please, she whispered, barely realizing she'd said it. The line clicked. Hi, the woman returned, her voice slightly more careful now. I can't provide detailed information, but we do have a Mark Reynolds staying here. For a moment, Katy didn't understand the words. Then they landed. Her chest tightened, her breath catching as something between relief and heartbreak surged at once. He's there? She asked, her voice breaking despite her best effort. He is, the woman confirmed. He's been here for a few months. Katy pressed a hand to her mouth. He's okay? She managed. He's safe, the woman said gently. That's what I can tell you. Safe. The word shouldn't have been as comforting as it was. Can I see him? Katy asked quickly. Please, I'm his daughter. I've been trying to find him. There was another pause. You can come during visiting hours, the woman said. I can't promise he'll want to see you, but you're welcome to try. That landed differently. Katy's hand tightened into a fist. I understand, she said. Thank you. Thank you so much. She repeated the address as it was given, writing it down quickly despite already knowing she wouldn't forget it. When the call ended, the room stayed silent. But it was a different kind of silence now. Not empty, filled. They had found him. Katy stood up abruptly, her energy shifting all at once. "Let's go," she said. Her grandmother blinked. "Now?" "Yes," Katy said, already reaching for her bag. "I need to see him." Her grandfather rose more slowly. "It's not far, but you should prepare yourself." Katy stopped, turning to him. "For what?" she asked. He held her gaze not unkindly. "For the fact that he may not be the man you're expecting to find." The word struck, but didn't stop her. "He's still my dad," she said quietly. Her grandfather nodded. "Yes, he is." The drive to the shelter felt like crossing into a place Katy had never imagined she'd go. The buildings changed gradually, newer developments giving way to older structures, then to quieter streets that felt more functional than lived in. Katy sat in the passenger seat again, her hands tightly clasped. They had found him. That should have been enough to ease something. Instead, it made everything sharper. Because now there was no distance left. No uncertainty to hide behind. Just the reality waiting at the end of the road. Daryl glanced at her briefly. "You okay?" She let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "No, but I'm going anyway." "Good," he said gently. They pulled into the parking lot, the building standing quietly in front of them. Unassuming, clean, almost ordinary if you didn't know what it was. Katy stared at it, her heart pounding. This was where her father had been living. For months, alone. She reached for the door handle, then paused. For the first time since the call, doubt crept in. What if he didn't want to see her? What if she was exactly the person he didn't need to face? Katy closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself. Too late for that. She opened the car door. "I'm going in," she said. And this time, she didn't hesitate. Chapter 7. The man who was still there. The building didn't look like what Katy had expected. There was no visible sign of desperation. No chaos. Just a clean, modest structure with a small sign near the entrance that read Community Outreach Shelter in calm, unassuming letters. It made everything harder. Because if it had looked worse, if it had matched the fear she'd built in her mind, it might have been easier to brace herself. Instead, it looked almost ordinary. Katy stepped inside. The air was warm, carrying faint traces of coffee and something freshly cleaned. A quiet murmur of voices came from somewhere deeper inside, low and steady, like life continuing without interruption. A woman sat at the front desk, her expression kind but observant. She looked up as Katy approached. "Hi," the woman said gently. "Can I help you?" Katy swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. Yes, I called earlier. About Mark Reynolds." Recognition flickered across the woman's face. "Katy?" Katy nodded quickly. "That's me." The woman offered a small, reassuring smile. "I'm Angela. I spoke with you on the phone." "Thank you," Katy said, the words coming out softer than she intended. "For telling me." Angela nodded once, her gaze steady. "Of course." There was a brief pause, and Katy felt the weight of what came next settling over her. "Is he?" she began, then stopped, trying to find the right way to say it. Angela seemed to understand anyway. "He's here today." Katy's chest tightened. "Does he know I'm here?" she asked. "Not yet," Angela said. "We don't notify residents unless they've asked us to." She studied Katy for a moment. "Would you like me to see if he's willing to talk to you?" The phrasing landed carefully. "Willing." Katy nodded, even though something in her stomach dipped at the implication. "Yes, please." Angela stood. "I'll be back in a minute." As she walked away, Katy became suddenly aware of everything. The faint hum of a vending machine, the distant sound of someone laughing, the rhythm of her own heartbeat in her ears. Daryl stepped a little closer beside her. "Hey," he said quietly. Katy exhaled shakily. "I didn't think it would feel like this." "Like what?" he asked. She searched for the word. "Like I'm about to ask a stranger if he'll see me." Daryl didn't have an immediate answer for that. After a moment, he said softly, "He's not a stranger." Katy looked down at her hands. "I know, but it feels like I've been treating him like one." Before Daryl could respond, Angela returned. Katy's heart jumped involuntarily. "He's in the common room," Angela said, her tone gentle. "I told him his daughter is here." "And?" Katy asked, unable to keep the tension from her voice. Angela held her gaze for a second. "He was surprised." Katy's breath caught. "Is he coming?" Angela nodded toward a hallway. "You can go to him." For a moment, Katy didn't move. Then she did. Each step down the hallway felt louder than it should, her shoes echoing softly against the floor. The hallway opened into a larger room, filled with tables, chairs, a few scattered couches. People sat in small groups or alone, engaged in quiet conversation or lost in their own thoughts. Katy's eyes scanned the room, and then stopped. He was sitting at a table near the window. Her father. For a second, everything in her body went still. He looked different. Not dramatically. Not in a way that made him unrecognizable. But the details were there if you knew where to look. His shoulders seemed slightly more rounded, as if something had weighed on them for too long. His hair, once neatly kept, was thinner, less controlled. His clothes were clean, but worn in a way that spoke of practicality over preference. But his face was the same. And when he looked up and saw her, the shock that crossed it was unmistakable. "Katy?" he said. Her name sounded like something fragile in his mouth. "Hi, Dad," she said. Her voice wavered, but she held it together. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he stood up quickly, knocking his chair back just slightly in the process. "What are you doing here?" he asked, not harshly, but with a kind of startled urgency. Katy blinked at him. "I came to see you." "How did you?" He stopped himself, shaking his head. "No, that doesn't matter. You shouldn't be here." The words hit harder than she expected. Katy took a step closer. "I've been trying to find you." "I'm fine," he said immediately. She stopped. "I didn't say you weren't," she replied softly. He looked away, his jaw tightening. "You don't need to worry about me." Her chest ached at that. "I do," she said. "No, you don't," he insisted. "You have your life. Your job." "Daryl." Katy stared at him. "You don't just disappear out of my life and decide I don't get to worry." Something flickered across his face then. Guilt? Maybe, or something heavier. "I didn't disappear," he said quietly. Katy let out a small, disbelieving breath. "Dad, I went to your apartment. Someone else lives there. Your phone's disconnected. Grandma and Grandpa haven't heard from you in months." He didn't respond, because there wasn't a response to that. "You didn't think to tell anyone?" she asked. His shoulders dropped slightly. "I didn't want to burden you," he said. The words were calm, almost rehearsed, and completely devastating. Katy stepped closer, her voice tightening. "Burden me? I'm your daughter." "I know," he said. "Then why would you go through all of this alone?" she pressed. He exhaled slowly, looking anywhere but at her. "Because it was my responsibility to handle it." "Handle what?" she asked, her frustration spilling through now. "Losing your job? Losing your apartment? Losing everything." A few heads turned nearby, and Katy forced her voice back down, even as her emotions surged. Her father flinched slightly at the words. "I didn't lose everything," he said quietly. Katy gestured helplessly around them. "You're living here." He finally met her eyes. "There are worse places," he said. The simplicity of it broke something in her. "I would have helped you," she said, her voice trembling now. "I would have been there." His expression softened, pain slipping through the calm exterior. "I know you would have," he said. "Then why didn't you let me?" she asked. He hesitated. And in that pause, Katy realized something she hadn't fully understood before. This wasn't just about pride. It was about something deeper. "I raised you to have your own life," he said finally. "Not to come back and fix mine." Katy's breath caught. "I'm not trying to fix you," she said, more urgently now. "I'm trying to be part of your life." "You are part of my life," he insisted. "Then why wasn't I in it?" she challenged. That landed. He didn't have an answer. For the first time, the distance between them wasn't just physical. It was everything that hadn't been said for years, everything that had quietly settled between them without either of them noticing. Katy took another step forward, her voice softening despite everything. "You didn't even give me the chance," she said. Her father looked at her then, really looked, and something in his expression shifted. "I didn't think you'd notice," he admitted. The honesty of it hurt more than anything else. Katy felt her throat tighten. "I didn't," she said. Silence fell between them. Not defensive, not angry, just real. And for the first time since she'd walked in, her father's composure cracked just slightly. "I didn't want you to see me like this," he said. Katy shook her head, her eyes stinging. "I wanted to see you. That's the part you missed." The words hung there, fragile but undeniable. Her father looked at her for a long moment, something shifting quietly behind his eyes. Not fixed, not resolved, but changing. And for the first time since she'd found him, it felt like they were finally in the same room. Chapter 8. What comes back? They didn't solve everything that day. Katy had expected, some small, irrational part of her had expected, that the moment she found him, everything would snap back into place. That her father would see her, recognize the mistake, and step back into the role she had always known him to fill. But life didn't work like that. Instead, they stood in the common room of a shelter, surrounded by quiet conversations and unfamiliar faces, trying to rebuild something that had unraveled slowly, almost invisibly over time. "I should have called you more," Katy said after a long silence, her voice softer now, the heat of earlier emotions settling into something steadier. Her father gave a faint, tired smile. "I should have answered when you did." She shook her head. "That's not the same thing." "No?" he asked, though there was no challenge in it. "No," she said, "because I didn't really try." That landed more firmly than she intended. He looked down briefly, his fingers brushing against the edge of the table, as if grounding himself. "You had your own life. That's what I wanted. And I used that as an excuse," she replied. He sighed quietly, not in frustration but in acknowledgement. "Maybe we both did what we thought was right." Katy studied him, taking in every detail she'd missed, the slight hesitations in his movements, the way he seemed to measure his words more carefully than he used to. You don't have to stay here, she said gently. We can figure something out. Together. Her father tensed slightly, the instinctive resistance immediate. I'm not asking you to fix everything, she added quickly, sensing it. I'm asking you to let me be part of it. That made him pause. Across the room, someone laughed, the sound oddly ordinary against the weight of their conversation. It grounded the moment just enough to keep it from collapsing under itself. I didn't want you to see me fail, he said after a moment. Katie's eyes softened. You didn't fail. He gave her a look then, not harsh, but honest. I lost my job. I lost my home. I pushed everyone away. That's not failure, she said firmly. That's something that happened to you. It's not that simple, he replied. No, she agreed. It's not. But it's also not something you had to go through alone. He didn't argue with that. Instead, he leaned back slightly, his gaze drifting past her for a moment before returning. When did you start looking for me? He asked. 2 days ago, she admitted. A faint eyebrow lifted. Only 2. 2 days since I realized I should have been looking a lot sooner, she clarified. That earned the smallest hint of a smile. I didn't expect you to find me at all, he said. Katy let out a quiet breath. Yeah, I'm starting to understand that. They stood there, something fragile but real taking shape between them. Not resolution, not yet, but recognition. A shared understanding of what had been missed, and what still remained. Daryl stepped a little closer then, clearing his throat gently. Hi again, he said, offering a small, respectful smile. Katy's father nodded at him. Daryl, I just wanted to say, Daryl continued, we're not here to push you into anything. Just to make sure you know you don't have to figure it all out by yourself anymore. Katy watched her father carefully as he absorbed that. Thank you, he said quietly. It wasn't agreement, but it wasn't rejection either. It was a start. They didn't leave together. That might have been the hardest part for Katy to accept. When the conversation came to a natural pause, when the initial shock had settled and the emotions had softened into something more manageable, her father had gently made it clear he wasn't ready to go with them yet. I need a little more time, he said. Katy wanted to protest. Every instinct in her pushed against that idea, urged her to fix it now, to close the distance immediately, to bring him back into her life in a way that felt secure and permanent. But she stopped herself, because this wasn't about dragging him back. It was about meeting him where he was. Okay, she said instead. The word felt strange in her mouth, but right. I'll come back, she added. This time he nodded without hesitation. I'd like that. Something in her chest loosened when he said it. Outside, the late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the parking lot. Katy stood beside the car, her emotions quieter now but no less present. Daryl leaned against the hood, watching her with a thoughtful expression. That went better than I expected, he said. Katy let out a small laugh. That feels like a very low bar. Still counts, he replied. She nodded, looking back at the building for a moment. He didn't run, she said. That's something. He didn't, Daryl agreed. Katy crossed her arms loosely, the weight of everything settling in a new way now. Not as panic, but as responsibility. Not the heavy, suffocating kind she'd imagined before. The real kind. The kind that required showing up. Consistently. I'm going to come back tomorrow, she said. Daryl smiled faintly. Of course you are. And the day after that, she added. Also sounds right. She looked at him then. Really looked, the memory of their conversation from just days ago still echoing in her mind. You were right, she said quietly. He shook his head immediately. This isn't about me being right. It kind of is, she insisted gently. If you hadn't said anything, I might not have noticed. Not in time. Daryl's expression softened. You did notice. Eventually, she said. But I'm not waiting for that to happen again. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. That's fair. Katy exhaled slowly, something steady settling into place. This wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of something different, something more intentional, more aware. Messier maybe, but also more real. She reached for the car door, then paused, glancing back at the building one last time. Her father was still in there, still her father. And this time, she wasn't going to let him fade into the background of her life again. Ready? Daryl asked. Katy smiled softly. Yeah. She opened the door and got in, closing it with a quiet sense of certainty. Because for the first time in a long while, she knew exactly what she needed to do next. Epilogue. The version that stayed. 1 year later, the movie paused halfway through because Katy couldn't stop laughing. Okay, she said, wiping at her eyes. That was absolutely your fault. It was not, Daryl protested from his end of the couch. You were the one who said he looked trustworthy. He was smiling, Katy argued. People who smile like that don't turn out to be villains. That is exactly how villains get you, Daryl said, leaning forward to grab the remote. You trust the smile, and next thing you know, betrayal. Katy laughed again, shaking her head. You watch too many conspiracy videos. I watch educational content, he corrected. About fake spies? They're hypothetical. He pointed the remote at the screen, then paused, eyeing her. Do you want me to start it again, or are we officially in commentary mode now? Katy opened her mouth to answer, but her phone buzzed on the coffee table. They both glanced at it. Daryl's mouth curved faintly as he leaned back. You gonna get that? Katy smiled without even looking at him. I know who it is. She reached for her phone, her expression softening as she read the message. Running late, but I'm bringing dessert. Don't let Daryl eat everything. Katy let out a quiet laugh. Let me guess, Daryl said. I'm being unfairly accused again. Katy tilted the phone toward him. You have a reputation. I have needs, he said. There's a difference. She set the phone down, still smiling. He's on his way. Daryl nodded, something warm settling into his expression. Good. The movie stayed paused. Neither of them minded. Mark Reynolds had been out of the shelter for 8 months. It hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been a smooth, cinematic transition where everything clicked neatly into place. There had been paperwork, waiting lists, hesitant conversations, and more than one moment where he'd nearly pulled back entirely. At first, he'd resisted nearly everything Katy suggested. Not angrily. Quietly. I'll figure it out, he would say. And the first few times she'd tried to argue, tried to push, tried to fix things faster than he was ready to accept them. Until she realized something important. Fixing it wasn't the same thing as being there. So she adjusted. She showed up instead. Every day at first. Then every other day. Then regular visits that felt less like obligation and more like routine. They talked. Sometimes about important things, housing, finances, options. And sometimes about nothing at all. Those were the conversations that changed everything. Because that was where her father came back. Not suddenly, not all at once, but piece by piece. Like something rediscovered rather than rebuilt. The first real turning point hadn't been a solution. It had been a laugh. He'd made some small, dry comment about the coffee at the shelter. Something so casually familiar that Katy had blinked at him, startled. And then laughed. And he had too. And just like that, there he was. Not lost. Just waiting in quieter spaces than she'd been looking. A knock at the door pulled Katy from her thoughts. Daryl stood immediately. I'll get it. You just want first access to dessert, she said. I'm not denying that. Katy smiled as she settled back against the couch, listening to the muted sounds of the door opening. Hey, Daryl said from the entryway. Hi, came her father's voice. It hit her the same way every time now. Not surprising anymore, but still grounding, still important. Katy stood as they stepped into the room. Her father looked good. Not untouched by the past year. There were still lines where stress had etched itself, still moments where his movements carried a hint of hesitation. But there was also steadiness again. Intention. Presence. He held up a small box as he walked in. I come in peace. And with pie. Daryl accepted it immediately. You're my favorite person. I brought it for Katy, her father said. You say that, Daryl replied, already turning toward the kitchen. Katy stepped forward, smiling as she hugged her dad. This time, he didn't hesitate. Hi, she said softly. Hi, kiddo, he replied. The nickname no longer felt like something fragile. Felt like it belonged. Dinner was easy. Not perfect. Not scripted. Just easy. They talked about ordinary things, Katy's work, Daryl's latest ridiculous internet discovery, her father's part-time job at a local supply store, which he spoke about with a quiet kind of pride that made her chest tighten in a good way. You should see the way he organizes inventory, Katy said at one point, leaning back in her chair. It's borderline intimidating. It's called efficiency, her father replied calmly. It's called labeling things that don't need labels, she shot back. Everything needs labels. Daryl raised a hand. I support this philosophy. Of course you do, Katy said. Organization is underrated, he added. Katy shook her head, smiling despite herself as she looked between them. A year ago, that moment wouldn't have existed. Not like this. Not with this ease, this rhythm, this shared space that felt whole instead of partially occupied. After dinner, they moved back to the living room. The movie resumed, but it wasn't really the focus. At some point, her father leaned back slightly, his gaze drifting toward the screen but not fully on it. You know, he said almost absently, I used to worry about something. Katy glanced over. What? He hesitated, then looked at her. That I'd become unnecessary, he said. The room went quieter, though not heavy, just attentive. Katy felt something in her chest shift. You didn't, she said. I know that now, he replied. There was no bitterness in it. No accusation. Just acknowledgement. Daryl cleared his throat lightly. For the record, I've always found you very necessary. Her father smiled faintly at that. Good, he said. I'll take that. Katy leaned her head back against the couch, her gaze settling on both of them for a moment. A year ago, she had been worried about the future in abstract terms. Marriage, timelines, unspoken expectations. Now, those things felt different, still important, but no longer distant, because she had seen what happened when you assumed time would always be there. And she had chosen, deliberately, not to assume anymore. Daryl caught her looking and raised an eyebrow. What? Katy smiled softly. Nothing. You're doing that thinking thing again, he said. It's a dangerous habit, she replied. He studied her for a second longer, then let it go, turning his attention back to the movie. Katy stayed where she was, her thoughts settling into something steady. Not perfect, but real. Her father sitting beside her. Daryl on her other side. A life that hadn't gone exactly as planned, but had, somehow, become more intentional because of it. She didn't know what everything would look like a year from now, but for the first time that didn't feel like something to worry about, because she wasn't waiting anymore. She was already there.